The following movie review and/or commentary may contain spoilers. Hail, good viewers and listeners in. The Rise of Skywalker is arguably the most important piece of media in the history of the Star Wars saga. What with the fan base massively divided since the last major installment of this series and declining merchandise sales across the board, the Star Wars franchise is in a sorry state of affairs. To turn things around, The Rise of Skywalker needed to be better than good. It needed to be orgasm-inducing, blow-your-balls-off, monkey-nuts awesome! We know by now that it isn't, but my question is, did it even have a chance? Was there any possible way for this movie to undo all the affronts committed in The Last Jedi and still be a worthy finale to the Skywalker saga? Well, let's dive right into this Wookiee vagina of a conundrum and trim our way out. Post-haste! Before we tackle The Rise of Skywalker itself, we need to examine how Star Wars arrived in this dire situation in the first place. And to do that, we need to go all the way back to the beginning. No, not that beginning. That beginning. You see, this all started in 1999 with the prequel trilogy. More specifically, the moment when Jar Jar stepped in the poopy. The release of The Phantom Menace marked the first time a large portion of the Star Wars fan base was vocally displeased with the product. The subsequent two films in the prequel trilogy did little to win back fans, leaving the fandom somewhat fractured, but still a whole, more or less. Flash forward to 2012. Sick of fan heat over the prequels, Georgie Porgy Puddin' Pie succumbs to the dark side and sells Lucasfilm to the evil Disney Empire. In spite of the fact Lucas had previously stated emphatically,
there is no Episode 7.
The House of Mouse wasted little time in announcing there would indeed be a sequel trilogy. Determined to win back the fans, Disney decided to play it safe with their first entry. And I mean play it really safe, in that they essentially remade A New Hope and called it The Force Awakens. Possibly called this because the Disney execs forced the filmmakers to stick to a set of rules that would ensure we didn't get another Phantom Menace. One of those rules apparently being, no original ideas! This basically handcuffed the writers, preventing them from doing anything truly different to what had come before. But the movie achieved its main objective in cleansing the audience's collective palate of the foul taste left by the prequels. And it did at least set up some interesting things for the rest of the sequel trilogy, like who this Supreme Leader Snoke guy is, where Rey is from, and what role Luke will play in all of this. Flash forward once again to 2017 and the release of The Last Jedi. This is where the sequel trilogy went off the rails and the Rise of Skywalker's problems really began. Writer, director, and corporate brown-noser Rian Johnson is somehow given complete creative control. Really? A guy whose biggest film under his belt was Evil Demon Golf Ball from Hell was handed the reins of a billion-dollar blockbuster. I had a bad feeling as soon as I heard this, because any time creative control over a Star Wars movie is given to one individual, it doesn't end well. Proving that to be true, Johnson promptly decides to throw everything set up in The Force Awakens straight in the trash. Snoke is killed. Rey's parents turn out to be intergalactic white trash meth heads, and Luke is turned into a nasty, bitter old piece of shit. As if that wasn't enough to set its sequel up for failure, the ending of The Last Jedi all but wiped out the good guys, leaving the Resistance with not even enough people to field a baseball team. There were literally 10 of them left at the end of the movie. How are they realistically supposed to stand against a fleet of hundreds, if not thousands, in the First Order? That's worse odds than even the Spartans faced. I don't think Leia's gonna be kicking anyone down a pit anytime soon. Seriously, how do you write a believable sequel with that setup? It's as if Rian Johnson said, "Let's see you follow this, JJ." To put this into perspective for you, Writing a sequel to The Last Jedi would be like going to a gangbang and the guy who went before you took a shit in the pussy. It's true, and you know it. I believe the reason Johnson really threw his entry in Star Wars away so carelessly is because it took little to no work to attain.
I'll tell you the problem with the scientific power that you're using here. It didn't require any discipline to attain it.
Thanks, Jeff. Kathleen Kennedy has gone on record stating she hired Johnson because she feels he writes strong female characters, and she wanted a relatively unknown director. That's it. That's all he had to do. Whereas Abrams had to put in far more work to get the job, with a much more extensive filmography and many box office successes to his name. Johnson was handed the series on a silver platter just because he ticked the right boxes for his Sith overlord. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not dick-riding Abrams. I'm no big fan of The Force Awakens, but I feel bad for the guy. He's a lifelong Star Wars fan, and when he gets his crack at making an entry, he's forced to be a corporate lackey to the Disney empire, fixing other people's problems. First, he had to deliver fan service to make up for Lucas's prequels with the super safe Foreskin Awakens. Then he had to do it again with the Rise of Skywalker. Johnson fucked up The Last Jedi so badly, much of the Rise of Skywalker is dedicated to retconning it, giving the new movie no real time to build an identity of its own. And now that we're finally on the subject of the Rise of Skywalker, I guess we should actually talk a bit about it. First off, it's not the best Star Wars movie, but it's also not nearly as bad as The Last Jedi. It plays it extremely safe once again, and you get the sense that every scene was carefully crafted to be as inoffensive to as many people as possible. As I said previously, much of the movie is spent walking back wrongs made in The Last Jedi, so there's not a lot of time for it to tell a story of its own, and there's certainly nothing you haven't seen before. If you're looking for an original plot, you won't find it here, Tony. It's chock full of MacGuffin chasing and bringing a plot device from point A to point B. There's so much world hopping that it seems to be designed to distract the audience from the fact that there's not much substance to it. As the old saying goes, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, blind them with bullshit. It feels like a fan fiction, and not a particularly good one at that. What the hell is that thing? Kill it! Kill it! The comedy also falls flat for the most part and is straight up terrible at times. But I guess it wouldn't be fair if we didn't talk about the good points of Rise of Skywalker too. I'd say it was about as good as it could be given how hamstrung it was by the two previous films and all of the corporate meddling. It looks and sounds amazing as would be expected. John Williams has gone on record saying this will be his last Star Wars film score, and he really knocks it out of the park. The new characters introduced in The Force Awakens, Finn, Poe, and Rey, finally get a chance to develop some chemistry since they actually spend some time together instead of being split up as they were in the past two films. Ian McDiarmid is great as Palpatine as always, but he doesn't really ham it up this time. I guess even he's sick of this bullshit by now, but he's good nonetheless. I know it was pretty disappointing to bring the Emperor back. Pretty much makes the original trilogy pointless now, doesn't it? But it was necessary to have some big villain to take Snoke's place. I mean, let's face it, you can't really have Rilo Ken as your big scary bad guy. He's a bumbling tit, whereas some parts of The Last Jedi didn't even feel like a Star Wars film. Canto bite! There is no mistaking The Rise of Skywalker for anything but a main series installment of Star Wars. It's got all the familiar series beats and then some. 2 minutes go by, bam! TIE Fighter. Another 2 minutes go by, bam! Millennium Falcon. Another 2 minutes go by, bam! Chewie's hairy nutsack. God damn, is this movie ever Star Warsy? They even gave C-3PO an arc just to make sure you get a dose of nostalgia. Overall, I'd give it 2.5 hairy Wookiee balls out of 5. If you're just after a dazzling popcorn movie, it's fine in that regard. If you're a die-hard Star Wars fan, it's miles better than The Last Jedi, which isn't really saying much. But after how hard that movie tried to destroy the Star Wars legacy, it felt nice to get a little fan service to close out the saga. In closing, I'd like to spend a few moments reflecting on the sequel trilogy as a whole. My first thought is, how? How could they have f***ed this up so badly? They took a $4 billion franchise and just winged it, for God's sake. Given the fact that the prequel trilogy wasn't exactly popular with the fans, it's shocking they would be this careless with the sequels. I mean, I understand how the prequel trilogy mess happened. George was in charge of everything and was surrounded by yes men. Nobody told him his ideas were shit. But with the sequel trilogy, there's multiple levels of management and boardrooms full of people who should have stepped in and said, hey guys, shouldn't we have a plan for all 3 movies and not just let 3 different people tell their own story? I guess they just thought they were so untouchable after the success of The Force Awakens that they could drop a big old turd on our plates and we'd eat it up. That arrogance is unreal and disgusting, quite frankly. And let me tell you something. Kathleen Kennedy is lucky she's a woman. Now, I don't want to get into a big discussion about gender discrimination. That's a whole other can of worms in itself. But it's objective facts that in this day and age, especially in Hollywood, a man would have been fired for a fuck-up of this magnitude on a project of this importance. But in the current climate of Me Too and the Force is female, I truly believe having a vagina at the very least helped Kennedy avoid the chopping block. Just look at all the male directors and producers who've been fired since the sequel trilogy began and tell me I'm wrong. I'm not saying women don't deserve a little more leeway given how blatantly male-biased the film industry was until recent years. Women haven't exactly had an easy ride in film, and most women in a position of power don't have decades of experience, but Kennedy does, and therefore she deserves to be held accountable for her arrogance and ineptitude. It truly does feel like they tried to sink this franchise with The Last Jedi. I know it's insane to say Disney would deliberately destroy their $4 billion investment, but what if it wasn't Disney's decision? What if after the success of The Force Awakens, Kennedy was given complete control and didn't require any additional approval from the Disney higher-ups? She may have valued pushing her agenda over making a successful film. Or maybe, just maybe, she's a real-life Sith Lord. Remember, there's always 2, a master and an apprentice. The original trilogy was a labor of love by artists, and it showed on the screen. This trilogy was engineered in corporate boardrooms, and unfortunately, it's equally obvious on screen. They spent too much time pandering to one demographic or the other, oftentimes polar opposite demographics, and the end result was pissing everybody off to some degree. Lucasfilm should take a lesson from the comics industry, which has driven away its core audience by pandering to the wrong demographics for their medium, nearly killing their entire industry as a result. When I was a kid, I didn't care that Wonder Woman was a grown white woman, and I was a little boy who was black from the waist down. I simply liked the stories, so I read her comics. It's as simple as that. Point being, anything written for a specific audience is no longer art in its purest form. It's a product, and people don't buy comics or go to the movies to see soulless garbage that was created as much by the marketing department as the writers themselves. Write good stories and the people will come, regardless of their age, race, gender, or sexual orientation. Hell, even the pansexuals might stop fucking their toasters long enough to go see a good flick. Till next time, fare thee well, fuckers! If you enjoyed the video, please leave a comment and a like. It helps us get more exposure on the YouTubes. And while you're at it, why not subscribe? We put out shit like this every week.